Hello, Catherine. Thank you very much for joining us today. As you know, this is part of the Future Ability project, and we'd like to hear from you about your experience of using digital storytelling as an assessment tool. But first of all, if you want to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Hi, Antonia. My name is Catherine Rees. I'm Senior Lecturer in Drama at Loughborough University. I specialise in contemporary British and Irish political theatre, but also in applied theatre practices.
Thank you. And what is your link with digital storytelling?
So my link with digital story comes from my very wonderful colleague, Antonia Liguori, who supported the inclusion of digital storytelling within a module that we ran together last academic year called Creative Arts in Education. Previous to that, I hadn't had much involvement or knowledge of digital stories or digital storytelling or the creation of digital stories prior to that. So I think so really it was a learning experience for me as well when we first started working with them in our teaching practice.
So, and what's the reason why you apply digital storytelling, and in particular linked to the learning outcomes and sort of type of assessment you were going to include in this specific module?
Okay, so for this specific module, it was really important that the students were able to, through the course of the whole module, which was 12 weeks teaching, were able to reflect on their own practice and to do so to do that throughout the whole of the time that we were teaching them. So they were able to think about what their initial thoughts and feelings were at the start of the project. And for this particular module, the project was to be designing a workshop to be delivered for students with learning difficulties. So they needed to capture how they felt at the beginning of that process when they started devising that work together as a group, but they also needed to reflect at the end as to how that went, what they were able to develop in their practice, how they were able to apply various different techniques, theoretical approaches to the practice that they developed. So it was really important as part of the learning outcomes that they had that element of self-reflection. What worked really well with the creation of digital storytelling, so digital stories within that context, was that they were able to do that visually and verbally, which worked really well for these creative students. The module was taken by students from creative arts disciplines, so art, graphic design, textiles, fashion. These are students who really wanted to express themselves visually and really wanted to create something at the end of the module that was a proper exploration and analysis and encapsulation of everything they had done. The alternative would have been for them to have written a piece of self-reflection, like a report or an essay, where they said, this is what I did, this is what I learned, this is what I was trying to do. But for them to create a piece of visual and verbal output instead worked much better for their skills, for their skill set, and they were much more comfortable with that process.
Oh, that's very interesting to hear. And I was actually thinking about, I know that you have, is one of your priority also inclusive learning, being somebody who's been working on EDI for a long time. So do you think that this type of assessment is more inclusive?
I absolutely would agree that it is. I think people perceive that there's a barrier, and I would put myself in that category of perhaps feeling apprehensive initially with working with new software, or feeling like they have to come to grips with complicated editing software and materials. But actually, having looked at the software that is commonly used and that we use with our students, it's very intuitive, and it's very easy to pick up how to create a timeline of your story and dropping different content in at different points. So I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do well, but it is an easy thing to learn, I think, initially, once you've had a bit of hands-on practice. So I think although that might feel like an initial barrier, it's actually much more inclusive than asking students to write a formal written report, which is only going to test one skill, really. It's only really going to test their ability to write. Whereas this particular assessment package assesses their ability to access that particular software and learn it, but also it better assesses their self-reflection. I think their ability to understand how visual image combines with spoken word, and also it tests their ability to do new things like animation, photography, and drawing as well.
And thinking about your particular experience on this module, what do you think are the main challenges of applying digital storytelling as an assessment tool?
I think there's probably two main challenges that you need to be upfront with the students about. The first one is initially they need to be really part of the conversation as to why it's really relevant for them. So I think they need a lot of support in understanding that actually they're creating these digital stories to capture their self-reflective process, so that they understand that that's very much part of their learning and it's not something that's separate to the main sort of thrust of the module. I think the other one is probably the amount of time that it might take in the module. And I think there's a kind of perception that this takes an awful lot of time to learn how to do. I think if there are ways in which somebody who's very skilled in creating digital stories and teaching them could make that process streamlined and fit into the teaching weeks a little bit more easily, I think that's a really, really good way forward, because it can be quite time heavy in terms of teaching them how to do it.